Hi, we're joined today by Dan Cohen, who is an investigative journalist and a film journalist. He specializes in documentary filmmaking as well as covering the Israeli Palestine conflict specifically. He was embedded in Israel for about 3 years, and he's released a very, I would say, groundbreaking documentary called Killing Gaza, and he's working on another, which he says will blow the lid completely off of Zionism. And we're all waiting with bated breath. Dan, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Eon podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much to have me. It's a great honor.
No, the honor is all ours. We've been following you for at least half a decade. Me and the other guys at the office, we love your work. We love Abby Martin. We love the Jimmy Dore Show. We love Max Blumenthal. We love you guys. And I think the work that you're doing is stellar stuff. Unfortunately, the circumstances under which we're meeting for the first time are very dire, and the situation on ground in Gaza is looking pretty bad. As somebody who was embedded in Israel, I think you will be able to better sift through the facts of the actual case and the sort of, through the fog of war that we're experiencing as lay people. What do you think is the situation on ground right now with regards to food, medical aid, the humanitarian concerns, and how is the war effort on this, I think, 34th day of the war?
I mean, the situation in Gaza is beyond catastrophic. It's unprecedented. I don't know if we've seen anything like this in modern history, maybe since World War II, and the worst atrocities that we saw, carried out by Nazis, carried out maybe by the Allies in the bombing of Dresden, which a lot of Israeli officials have actually cited as an example for what they want to do. Um, you have well over 10,000 people documented dead, killed by Israel in Gaza. You have many, some 35 or more thousand or more injuries. And this is not, these are not simple injuries like a broken arm. These are missing limbs, burned bodies with very severe burns, surgeries done without any kind of anesthesia. You have disease spreading because there's lack of medicine, antibiotics. Um, More than 4,000 of those killed are children. We've seen so many horrific images coming from Gaza of dead babies and children. More than one third are women, and of course, it's just beyond anything I could ever imagine. I mean, I was in Gaza in 2014 for the last 10 days of a 51-day assault. And at that time, that was unprecedented. Israel killed something like 1,400 people, including 551 children, in 51 days. And this was shocking, the level of atrocity carried out. And the current assault on Gaza is of a far more severe scale, which my friends in Gaza are just in shock all the time. My good friend Motaz Azaiza, who's documenting the massacres on a daily basis. You just look at his Instagram and see the reality of it, and the other brave journalists who are documenting this slaughter for the world to see. So large swaths of Gaza are now piles of smoldering rubble with humans trapped under who will never be rescued and who will just die the worst possible death. And meanwhile, of course, you have Israeli hostages inside tunnel systems controlled by Hamas, and the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu is not interested in exchanging those captives for some kind of for Palestinian captives or for a ceasefire or anything else. In fact, the Guardian reported today that Netanyahu rejected a 5-day ceasefire in exchange for some of the hostages. So the Netanyahu government, supported completely by the United States, is hell bent on the mass destruction of Gaza, of the ethnic cleansing of its 2.4 million residents, and is committing acts of genocide. It shocks the conscience of the world, and that's what we've been seeing.
I was very surprised by the fact that you didn't hesitate in using the word ceasefire, unlike a lot of Western political leaders who, especially with Justin Trudeau almost literally fumbling the words, and then this completely, I mean, new term, I've never heard it before, and I followed the Iraq and Afghan war pretty closely. Humanitarian pause. I mean, what is the difference in perhaps the PR of it, in the implication? Why is it that the American, state is willing to sign off on this kind of genocide, and then they're unable to even say the word ceasefire? I mean, isn't the only American senator, I think Rashida Tlaib, who's also a Palestinian, the only American Palestinian, I think, in office, and she's the only one who's actually caused for a tangible ceasefire, if I'm not wrong. Why is it that the American media and the American establishment and political class are unable to say the words ceasefire, and they've instead replaced it with the words humanitarian pause? And what do you think the motivation here is with Netanyahu's government? Because it seems unproportional, the response, and it seems out of character even for Israel. I mean, am I wrong in that assessment?
Well, first of all, the only U.S. senator to have called for a ceasefire is Dick Durbin. Rashida Tlaib is a member of she's a member of the House of Representatives, the lower chamber of Congress, and she and I think roughly a dozen other representatives have called for. Members of the House of Representatives have called for a ceasefire, but in the Senate, Dick Durbin is the only one. So it's absolutely shocking. In terms of why this is, well, I think we have to look at the influence of the Israel lobby, which has been documented thoroughly and is no secret. You can, of course, read the classic book by Stephen Walt and John Mearsheimer, The Israel Lobby is what it's called. You can also see the groundbreaking documentaries showing how the Israel lobby operates in the United States and also in the UK, called The Lobby, that was published by Al Jazeera years ago. And these were censored, these documentaries, but managed to get out anyway. So they show the infrastructure of how and the management, the maintenance of the Israel lobby's power inside the United States at kind of all levels of government, federal, state, and even local level, and how its operatives carry out their tasks by deception, by bribery, this kind of thing. So I think there's another element of it. It's not just a matter of the Israel lobby controlling and manipulating. There's also, I think, an ideological aspect that doesn't really get discussed, that our ruling class here in the United States, of course, has waged war all over the world, has carried out drone strikes and assassinations and secret illegal wars and murders of all kinds. And we in the United States tend to think, well, we're exempt from that because we are American citizens. Well, of course, that's absurd. Our government would love to have that kind of control over us. And I think it is really that our ruling class sees the Gaza Strip as the image of what it would like to do to the masses of people in the United States, that anyone who dissents from the permanent uniparty line or exposes embarrassing information like Julian Assange did can be imprisoned or killed and has no rights, can be declared a non-citizen, a subhuman, and deported. And so when I think maybe in 2011, somewhere around there, Hillary Clinton commented on Julian Assange, can't we just take this guy out with a drone? Well, this is precisely what's happening in the Gaza Strip. And it's not only in the Gaza Strip, but so you have this sort of fascism, Zionist fascism, that inspires American fascism. And I think that is kind of the core of what's happening. Of course, there are also intelligence operations. We know that Jeffrey Epstein, the Jeffrey Epstein case is not just a matter of a child rape trafficking ring, but is actually an intelligence operation in order to compel people to stay quiet or to comply with demands. in terms of the bizarre terminology of humanitarian pause rather than ceasefire, which there are, again, one senator and roughly a dozen members of the House of Representatives that support a ceasefire, and the other all opposed to, and we've including Bernie Sanders, the great progressive hope of the Democratic Party, who opposes a ceasefire, even as the families of Israeli hostages in Gaza are desperate for a ceasefire and negotiations. Bernie Sanders is still rejecting this. This concept of humanitarian pause is incredibly cynical. In fact, the United States has now said it worked out with Israel a period of 5-hour periods of humanitarian pause in northern Gaza in order to facilitate movement of Palestinians who remain there in northern Gaza to move south. Now, what this is actually a plan for ethnic cleansing, to compel them to do so by stopping the bombing for a few minutes so Israel can further consolidate its control of the northern Gaza Strip. And this is ethnic cleansing that the United States is directly involved in, dressed up under the pretext of humanitarianism. It is the height of cynicism. So I think we have to be absolutely clear that a humanitarian pause is not a ceasefire whatsoever. What we need is a real ceasefire and real negotiations. But, as long as Israel has the blanket support of the United States, clearly this is, not going to happen unless there's some kind of massive political pressure from below. And that's what we've been trying to do through media, through journalism, and through demonstrations in the streets. We just saw over this past Saturday, we saw 300,000 people here in the streets of Washington, D.C., and I was proud to be one of those demanding a ceasefire.
And we're proud for you, and we're proud of you participating in such an enthusiastic fashion. You've given a lot there to unpack. Now, if we start from the top, you talked about how Gaza is a sort of experimental sort of playground, and we know militarily that is true for the Israeli army. But you've extended that argument, and you said that, and that's, because it's quite popular, it's a quite popular narrative that Israel tests out new weapons and weapon systems and then exports them to sort of, the rest of the world. But you've extended that logic, and you said maybe perhaps this is an example being set on a global level, that this is what we do with any sort of political dissent or any sort of critique or challenge to empire. And that there's some sort of nexus between the American neoliberal or neocon world order and perhaps a Zionist lobby. And you alluded to the book, the fairly popular book. It was very popular in Pakistan, I'll tell you that much. The Israel Lobby, and then the subsequent documentary that was that sort of platformed off of that book that was released by Al Jazeera. And you also talked in the same breath about censorship. So, does the media narrative that Israel promotes, that comes under the ambit of hasbara, which is their sort of propaganda and their sort of permeation of civil society with ideas that are potent, that are dangerous, and that are very, very effective in convincing large masses of people that Israel is the victim? How is it that with this modern technology, with all the luxuries and all the access that the Western world has to offer, smack dab in the Middle East, in an area that you would consider as part of the global South, how is it that the Zionist lobby is still able to pull off? What is the mechanism? And you alluded to the Jeffrey Epstein situation, you alluded to honey trappings and money laundering, and you also then further said that the first American that was sort of publicly targeted was Julian Assange. As a Muslim, I'll let you know that it was Anwar al-Awlaki, I think, was the first American citizen that you guys straight up murked. He was a Yemeni citizen, and he was definitely involved with on some sort of level with Al-Qaeda. But I felt that if at that point the American people didn't realize that their rights were going to be casually taken away whenever the American establishment wanted them to, and they could be drone striked, as you said in Obama's smart war doctrine. How do people react to that, and how do people react now when they see clearly that their rights are not, they're not as set in stone as they maybe thought prior to these wars?
Well, for one just minor correction, Julian Assange is not even a U.S. citizen. He's an Australian
Sorry,
citizen.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you don't even have to be a U.S. citizen to be considered. He's accused of treason here in the United States, where they want to put him on trial for treason, but he's not a citizen. So how can you be a traitor to a country that is not your own? It's completely absurd. It's legal fiction. And yes, you're correct. Anwar al-Awlaki was the first American citizen to be struck by a drone, and then they killed his son as well. So you can see that his 16-year-old son, which that drew some outrage among progressive circles, but largely under the guise of the war on terror, the post 9/11 war on terror and the permanent war state that was launched in the wake of those attacks. We saw, particularly among the right wing, a willing embrace of fascism, and they were willing to give up their rights. And many liberals were too, frankly, when it came a bit later, when it was Obama's turn to be at the helm of the system. And so we've seen people willingly give up their rights in the name of security, which of course never actually created any more security. It takes away their security, ironically. So I think people are, the media plays a huge role in this, and how these wars are presented, how people understand them, what the United States is doing in these wars all around. And so, that's why I do what I do. This is why I do this work. And I try to, not only focus on Palestine, but focus on, to put this in a greater context of Western imperialism. And I think, to expand a little bit more on the point of how Gaza is kind of, Palestinians are the canary in the coal mine, and Gaza is kind of the test case. As you were saying, it's used as a military testing ground, which is absolutely true. But more than that, I mean, we see now the anti-Palestinian rhetoric here in the United States at an all-time high, as if it's the day after 9/11 once again. We saw a 6-year-old Palestinian boy stabbed to death. He was stabbed 26 or 28 times by some fanatic who thought he was stopping Islam or stopping Hamas or something like that. And this has been cheered on by our political establishment. It's been incited. These kinds of attacks have been incited. We have Ron DeSantis, a presidential hopeful who portrays himself as some kind of anti-establishment candidate, who has said that he would never let any Palestinian from Gaza inside the United States, even the ones who are against Hamas, because they're all anti-Semitic. And then, of course, a few days later, we see this murder. At the same time, Ron DeSantis has actually banned student groups at universities in Florida from who support Palestinian freedom. Students for Justice in Palestine, which these groups have hosted people like me to be able to talk about what's happening in Palestine in an open forum. But these have now been banned. So we see the censorship. We see this explosion of fascism, and the talk about any kind of so-called support for Hamas, pro-Hamas sentiment is now being treated. They want to criminalize it in the United States. So they take this logic of what's happening in Israeli society, where now anti-war demonstrations are banned in Israel. A small demonstration of the leading Palestinian representative group in Israel called the Arab Higher Up Committee, that was attacked by Israeli police today just for a small anti-war demonstration. And so we see they want to implement the same kind of thing here to prevent these mass demonstrations from happening. One difference is that we have a constitution in the United States. We have the First Amendment, which protects freedom of speech. So there is some kind of way to fight these things legally. Israel, however, is a completely fake democracy where it has no constitution. It has only basic laws that can be changed through the increasingly fascistic Knesset. So, I mean, this has to be, we have to understand that the American political class is trying to take this crisis generated by Netanyahu in Israel and use that to implement similar measures to crack down on free speech, to crack down on the First Amendment, to crack down on public organizing and demonstrations, and implement Zionist-style fascism here in the United States. And that's being cheered on by both parties, really, by the Democratic and the Republican establishment, the uniparty of the permanent war state.
I mean, candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy and Nikki Haley, one would expect that they would just come out, all guns blazing, demanding genocide, asking for war crimes. And that's what they both did. I mean, we as third-party observers didn't expect any less from those two. But people like RFK Jr., who were sort of, touting themselves as anti-establishment whatevers, and Ron DeSantis, and even Donald Trump. Donald Trump established himself as an anti-war candidate. And I'll tell you that even in the South Asian community in America, as well as over here, we had suspicions of him. But eventually people came around to it. They were like, maybe this guy is anti-establishment, anti-war. But when it comes down to Israel, it seems that the anti-war rhetoric is not a principled anti-war rhetoric. It's simply of practical expediency. When it's easier to get votes through that, you say what you have to say. With RFK Jr. saying weird, insane things about vaccines and all these sorts of, zany takes about the nature of a particular virus that we won't mention. And climate change and what have you. But at the same time, when it comes to Israel, everybody seems to toe the same line. It's almost in lockstep that the entire American political class, and it's hilarious for us to watch, by the way, in the third world, the speed with which they and then the ultimate defense is always that there is no Zionist lobby. That's anti-Semitic. The equivocation between books like the Israel Lobby and perhaps the Protocol of the Elders of Zion is absurd, and we see a very effective strategy being employed for the past at least however many years I've been active and conscious and aware of American politics, specifically after 9/11. I would have to say that any criticism levied against Israel is somehow converted into criticism against a people, a religious group, or an ethnic group, which is absurd. I mean, how is it that a lot of American entertainment, film, media, TV, news, radio, how has it been so deeply infiltrated with the Zionist lobby? I mean, with these clowns like Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire, I understand. I get it. They're financed through Zionist institutions and individuals, and that's how they operate. But just like the mainstream of Fox and CNN, and surely wouldn't they put America first in their sort of reporting? Or what's their concern with the only democracy in the Middle East, the only ethnocracy in the Middle East? As somebody in media, how do you deal with this, and how do you reconcile this, and how do you combat against this?
Well, yeah, it's been really disappointing, but not surprising to see that the entire political establishment, even the so-called alternative candidates like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., have taken such a hardcore pro-war line. I mean, this is a guy who for months has been saying that he's going to that he would end the Ukraine war, and he opposes the neocon project. But Israel is the ultimate neocon project, even more so than Ukraine, and it long predates the Ukraine war. So you have to wonder, is he just clueless, or is there something else going on? And we've seen RFK adopt the most hardline rhetoric, not just calling for a two-state solution or trying to appear moderate or something like that. He's taken the most fanatical positions that he's adopted straight from the mouth of a guy named Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, who's not actually a rabbi, but plays one in the media, and has done appearances with this fanatic. And Shmuley Boteach he owes his entire career to the late Sheldon Adelson, the casino mogul who worked with the CIA to spy on Julian Assange. in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. So, the fact that Robert Kennedy says he's going to oppose neocons while just going along with the big neocon project shows what an absolute fraud he is. And he has refused to hear any kind of criticism and just maintains, 2 days ago, he appeared with Dave Rubin, the Zionist podcaster, and said, "It's my job to defend Israel." It's not so. It's not something he's saying about the United States. It's my job to defend the American people. Or he says that about Israel. I mean, it's crazy, and it's not. We need to defend the Israeli people from, meaning we need to have actual peace. He's talking about defending the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, the fascist government. So it just exposes him as a total fraud. So it's like the Democratic Party is never going to let him, or the deep state is never going to let him anywhere near the seat of power. They're not going to let him become president. So what's the point of playing along with all of this? So you have to wonder if he's compromised or what's really going on here, or if he's just really ideologically committed to Israel. But if that's the case, then he shouldn't be president because a majority of Americans oppose what he's saying. A majority of Americans want a ceasefire, which he opposes. The entire political establishment is completely rotten here. Remind me what the other.
We'll get to the other one, but I just really want to follow up on that. Yeah, that's something very fascinating that you've pointed out, that the entire political establishment has just thrown caution to the wind. I mean, with the Biden administration, they're looking at another election in the next year, and they have no concern for young voters or anti-war voters. I mean, with RFK even, it's killed his presidential campaign, right? It's basically ended it. And at the same, so you have to wonder what level of compromise do these people, the level of compromise that the Israel lobby has on these people, or just this insane sort of, and that leads us nicely into, I saw a thing of you circulating around on the internet. You really, very beautifully broke down what Zionism actually is. So how effective is this lobby? And what are they lobbying for? What is Zionism? Is it what we're told in sort of, in our history books when we read about Herzl, or is there something deeper to it? And how does it, why is it that it's so deeply embedded in America as opposed to Europe?
Yeah. I mean, one more comment on Kennedy, as you were saying, I received a substantial donation yesterday from a former supporter of his who said that they regret so much that they had donated money to his campaign. And they said, I'm trying to make it up by donating to you, Dan Cohen. So, you just see he's alienating his entire base in order to suck up to the powers that be that will never let him anywhere near the seat of power. Now, in terms of, what is Zionism? I think the best way to understand Zionism is it's a European nationalist movement that arose out of the European, Romantic period and the Spring of Nations, as they call it. And it was basically atheistic Jews, secularized Jews who hated Orthodox Judaism, who hated what Jews had been and blamed those Jews for anti-Semitism, for the suffering of Jews throughout the centuries and millennium. And so what they did is they decided, instead of fighting against anti-Semitism and saying, no, Jews should be able to live anywhere, Jews should be able to live in their home countries, in Europe, they said, no, it's the Jews' fault that they are under attack. And so the answer to it is not to fight back, but to join the anti-Semites and to become a separate nation. And so they invented the concept of Jewish nationhood. And so in order to do that, they needed a mythology, as any nationalist movement needed. And so in order to appeal to Jews, they used the Jewish religion. They took the theology of the Jewish religion and secularized it, as Prometheus took fire from the gods. Zionists took the holy aspects of Judaism the supernatural theological aspects of Judaism and made it into something that could be accomplished by political means. So the idea of Jews around the world going to the land of Israel was something that only in the Jewish religion, that only God could make happen. It was actually forbidden for Jews to emigrate to Palestine in mass. Same with having a Jewish state. There's in the Jewish religion, there's a Jewish kingdom, but that only happens again when God decides. There's nothing that Jews can do to facilitate that. It's completely forbidden. To have a Jewish army, any of these things. So to have a temple, for example. And so Zionism took these concepts and made them into achievable goals. And Theodor Herzl used basically contacts through diplomacy, kind of like an early Israel lobby, where he went to Arthur Balfour in Britain, and he went to Tsar Nicholas in Russia, both of whom were raging anti-Semites. Tsar Nicholas had actually overseen pogroms of Jews in the Pale of Settlement, which is where my ancestors come from. May they rest in peace. They were all murdered Nazis in the Holocaust, and he managed to get support from highest diplomatic levels for a quote unquote Jewish national homeland in Palestine. And so these waves of emigration began because basically European anti-Semites wanted to get rid of Jews, and Zionists also wanted to see a Judenrein Europe, a Jew-free Europe, and all of them to move in Palestine. So Zionists and anti-Semites always had a common agenda of getting rid of all Jews from Europe. And so this logic of Zionism being put on the tracks of the Jewish religion, of Jewish messianism, did not stop there. And so through the decades, what happened is as Zionism compelled more and more Jews to relocate to Palestine and then the state of Israel, well, those goals were accomplished, but it has further stops along this ideological pathway. And so all of this, again, is completely forbidden in Judaism to this day. Or the mainstream of Orthodox Judaism completely rejects Zionism. In fact, many of the Orthodox Jews in Israel itself reject Zionism. They are anti-Zionist. They see this as an abomination. So Zionists basically changed the Jewish religion, and in order to suit their nationalist goals. And it has gotten more and more and more extreme to the point where there's even a focus on destroying the Al-Aqsa compound and the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and expelling the Islamic presence and any non-Jews in the area, of course, churches for Palestinian Christians as well. And on the rubble of Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the oldest shrine in Islam, and the third holiest site, they want to build some kind of slaughterhouse of worship where they sacrifice animals to God, as was done in the times of the temple. However, again, this is completely forbidden in Judaism. For a Jew to even step foot onto the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa compound, is considered a grave sin in Judaism, punishable by a divinely imposed death sentence. In fact, it is one of the worst sins a Jew can do. And this is for theological, sort of esoteric theological reasons, but nonetheless, it is true. But Zionists, because they're nationalists, have recast the Al-Aqsa compound as something to be conquered, because it's all about nationalism and conquest and fascism and expelling anyone who does not agree to submit to the Zionist theocracy. And so this is essentially the point we're at today. So this war, this ethnic cleansing, this genocide of Gaza is not about security or anything like that, of course. It's actually for the ideological core of Zionism, which is running the show today. It is about removing all traces of of Christianity and Islam and anyone who is not Jewish in the demented, perverse version of Judaism promoted by Zionism and establishing this theocratic state. And so, of course, secular Jews in Tel Aviv would not be allowed to live. They would not be able to, drive or on Shabbat, on the holy Sabbath. They will be forced to live in this theocracy. So this is the ideology driving Israel today. And Netanyahu, well, he's completely secular and is not an observant Jew at all. He has surrounded himself for years and years and years with the most fanatical elements of Israeli society. The best two examples, the most prominent, are Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, who is a follower of Rabbi Meir Kahane, who's essentially like the Zionist version of an ISIS ideologue. And Itamar Ben-Gvir was a member of what Israel and the United States considered a terrorist group. This Kahanist group was called a terrorist group, and now he's actually running the police. And he's the one who has banned these anti-war demonstrations. And then you have Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, who in 2017 published his genocidal plan, literally in Hebrew called the subjugation plan. And this plan called for full ethnic cleansing. Basically, the three options he listed out in the subjugation plan were anyone who submits to the state of Israel and abides by what are called the Noahide laws, which are a series of 7 laws for non-Jews that mean no idol worship, so no Christianity, no Islam, no other religion, and basically you live as a slave. That is one option. The other option is you leave, you're ethnically cleansed, you expel, or the third option is you are killed. You're executed. So these are the 3 options that Bezalel Smotrich wrote in his public plan called the subjugation plan in 2017. And this man is a finance minister, and there are others around Netanyahu. These are the 2 most prominent ones. So what you see is, the best way I can describe Israel is it's ISIS with nuclear bombs and coffee shops in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, the entire time I was thinking you were describing European cosmopolitan ISIS, and as a Muslim, it didn't sound half bad. I was kind of tempted. No,
right. I mean, ISIS couldn't. They couldn't. It's like, imagine if they had established diplomatic relations and were, accepted and this kind of thing. And how happy were European powers to see, Muslims leave Europe, because of course Islamophobia is rampant in Europe, and they would love for them to go to some other country and wage war and
establish
kill the minority.
The caliphate or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
No, the what's really funny is that the parallels between modern Christian Zionism with these insane evangelical types, the fact that implicit in their Zionism is a deep anti-Semitism. So like with Tsar Nicholas and Lord Balfour, people of that ilk, they have a genuine deep hatred for the Jewish people. And they want them out of Europe. They want Europe to be the land for the Europeans, for these pure white people. And they want these Europeans because they're money lenders and they're coin clippers. And they have these insane ideas about the Jewish community. They want them to be expelled from Europe. And they want somebody else to deal with their problem. So you know what we'll do? We'll send them over to whatever, holy land they want to establish. The parallels between that back in the day in the 1800s and the 1900s and today, with Christian Zionists literally believing that if they somehow speed up the process of the end times, they have some weird eschatological ideas about what they need to accelerate. And if they somehow trigger some sort of, a blood feud between the Muslims and the Jews, as well as the fellow Christian brothers in Palestine, and they establish the third temple, it is, I think, that the Christians believe that Jesus, who is their Messiah, will come back. And the Jews are like, sure. Zionists are like, sure, we'll take your money. We don't mind. But inbuilt into the Christian sort of Zionism isn't the idea that at the end that the Messiah will come and that they'll slaughter all the Jews in Israel. I mean, Isn't that sort of implicit? That's insane to me. Um, the symbiosis of these two, of white European nationalism and there's a third one now in the mix, Indian Hindu nationalism. If you've seen online, which is hilarious to see. I mean, India's flirtation with fascism in the past 10, 15 years has been it's been both terrifying and comical to see online, because the way the Indians tend to botch these things. As a Pakistani, I have a bias. I can't even lie. So Zionism is an extremely fanatical religious tendency amongst a particular set of European Jews. How do they get the secular types, the atheist types, the reformed Jews? How do they get, the Yemeni Jews, the Mizrahis, the Abyssinian, the African Jews? How do they get them to reconcile to this European subservience? Because it's quite clear that they're not leading in Israeli society. Secular Jews, I mean, the Labour Party and the Liberals had their time with Yitzhak Rabin, but they were literally killed off. You know what I mean? And then how are they able to reconcile themselves? How are they able to see themselves in Israeli society? Aren't they afraid of an ISIS-style, Al-Qaeda-style takeover? I mean, Iraq collapsed, Libya collapsed, Afghanistan is in the hands of the Taliban right now. Don't they see the parallels with that in Israel, and then, of potentially giving up and ceding power to these extremists and living under some sort of Jewish Sharia law?
For one thing, Zionism is fundamentally not a religious movement. It's completely anti-religious. I mean, that's what I was trying to explain with Zionism's secular, atheistic, nationalist roots, and that's fundamentally what it is at the core. Even the religious Zionists, the ones who want to build a temple and sacrifice animals, this is more of an expression of Zionist sovereignty and control and nationalism than it is religion, because the Jewish religion forbids all of that. Like I said, that can only happen when God decides, and anyone who is engaging that kind of activity is considered they are considered a hurdle, an impediment to an actual messianic period for in Jewish religion and in Jewish orthodoxy. So I mean, many Jews see Zionism as false messianism, and they've always seen it that way. And so the religious ones, the logic that they use, there was basically in the early 20th century, there was a rabbi when the vast majority of rabbis and Jews rejected Zionism and denounced it as false messianism. There was a rabbi who was appointed by the British as the chief rabbi of Palestine for obvious reasons, named Rabbi Cook was his name. And Rabbi Cook came up with this concept that the secular nationalists are going to build this Jewish state for us, and then we are going to take it over. And so they are. He used a biblical term of the Messiah's donkey, the belief that when the Messiah will come, he will ride in
I'm gonna
on a donkey.
Have to cut you off. You're gonna have to fix your camera. I think you've gone. You've disappeared.
Oh, there we go. I don't know what happened,
sorry,
but okay. Should I
you
start over?
No.
Or
can you repeat this
go back a
Messiah's
little bit?
donkey thing?
Yeah. So Rabbi Cook used a biblical concept called the Messiah's donkey. The belief in Jewish tradition is that when the Messiah comes, it will ride in on a donkey. Now, he took that and innovated and created this concept that the secular Zionists that were sinners and not believers, they are actually the donkey, and that builds the state and toils to build the state and doesn't actually know what it is fundamentally doing. It's just doing it because that's what a donkey does, and that's what the seculars do. And the religious Zionists are the Messiah that will ride in on the back of this donkey and will eventually take over and are fundamentally in control. They are the real brains of the operation. And so the seculars saw that, well, we need some kind of religious pretext. We'll use this guy. And Cook, thought, well, we're going to benefit too. And so he tried to tell religious Jews that, no, this is how it's going to happen. We're going to take it into our own hands. They're going to do it for us. And then this is how we're going to have a Jewish kingdom, a messianic period. And so his tiny sort of strain of Zionism was very, it was extreme in a sense, but it wasn't powerful at all. It was very, very marginal until 1948 and really in 1967. After his death, it became activated. It was seen as the conquest of the West Bank, which contains really the holy cities in Judaism of Jerusalem and Hebron and these areas that when Israel was established in 1948, that part of Palestine was not really the holy parts. It was very close to it. It approached it, but it wasn't there. So the establishment of the state and the takeover of these territories, the occupation of those territories, Gaza, Sinai, the Golan Heights, this breathed life into this religious Zionist concept. And that religious Zionist concept that Rabbi Kook had invented basically has shifted over time more and more and more right wing. And his son was actually the one who interpreted it, where his father's teachings, and the idea was that the state of Israel is God's vessel, is holy in itself, and everything it does. In fact, the soldiers' uniforms are like the priestly garb. The bullets are holy. The weapons are holy. Like, this is all God's doing. And so what happened is actually this was the belief of Kookism. And what happened is in 1977, the Camp David Accords began, the so-called peace accord with Egypt. And in 1982, when it was implemented, this was like a shock for religious Zionism, because they thought that this is a deterministic process in which, as the state of Israel expands, it cannot go back. And so for the state of Israel to give up so-called conquered Jewish land is completely at odds with the teachings of Rabbi Kook. It's unthinkable. So this actually radicalized religious Zionism. And in response, you saw a number of attempted terrorist attacks on the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa in the 1980s in order to prevent the withdrawal from the Egyptian Sinai Desert. Now, most of these failed because the Israeli security services, not only the Israeli security services, but for a number of reasons, prevented them from happening. Though some did succeed. There was a fire in Al-Aqsa. It was in the Dome of the Rock. It was set on fire, famously. And so this process of the fragmentation and the shattering of this kind of Kookist paradigm that the state of Israel is holy, and in this deterministic process of expansion and conquest, was further undermined again in the 1990s with the Oslo process, when with Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat shaking hands on the White House lawn. This was unthinkable. It gave away, in the eyes of Zionism, conquered land inside the West Bank. It rolled back Zionist sovereignty. And so, again, this is unthinkable. And that led, of course, to the assassination of the Israeli Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin. He was considered a traitor to the Zionist project, and therefore, din rodef is the term in Hebrew, where he can be assassinated for that. And there were many rabbis, Zionist rabbis, calling for him to be killed. And finally, someone named Yigal Amir actually did it. Then once again, and so in the wake of that, not only you have this assassination, you have more and more Zionist rabbis undermining the 2,000-year prohibition on actually going to the Temple Mount, because it's completely forbidden, and saying, no, we have to go up there and demonstrate our sovereignty, that we run the place, that we control it. And so more and more people start doing that. Now, the final sort of blow to this Kookist paradigm was in the 2005 so-called withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, where they removed Jewish settlements, and this was a traumatic process for the Zionist psyche. And after that, and really in the 2010s, there were even more religious Zionists who didn't see the state of Israel as this holy vessel, but as a bourgeois, compromised state that was going against God's will, and so it had to be forced to act. And so more and more Zionists were going to the Temple Mount and demonstrating through prayer, which is not something that was ever done there. Jewish prayer was never. I mean, Jews never went to the Temple Mount, let alone prayed there. So they completely invented these concepts in order to agitate against the Muslim population there, because the status quo at the Al-Aqsa compound is that this is an Islamic worship site and anyone else can visit. You know, Muslims don't have a problem with Jews visiting, or tourists or Christians, anyone else visiting. That's a normal site. But for other people to go up there and worship is a direct challenge, especially Zionists, is a direct challenge to their control of the site. And so at the same time, throughout this process of Zionism radicalizing, you also have, since the 1970s, a process of religious Zionism taking control of the whole state, the institutions, the culture, to the point today where the Israeli army is a theocratic army. It is not looking for security. You know, it's not trying to make security trade-offs or anything. It's purely about establishing theocracy at the highest levels and throughout the ranks. Same reason you have settlers living in, you know, hilltops on the West Bank and burning babies, Palestinian babies alive, and this kind of thing. And this is the reason why the Israeli army is so comfortable with slaughtering thousands and thousands, not just of Palestinian civilians, but of babies, because they actually see that these people they consider them what is called, well, what Netanyahu said, Amalek. Amalek is an ancient biblical nation that must be exterminated. And so they're applying this ideology or this concept to, you know, modern, to the Palestinians. So how do you get secular to go along with that, you asked? Well, for one thing, Zionism is it is fundamentally nationalism. And so secular Zionists who like to eat pork and, you know, drive on the Sabbath and this kind of thing, they see it as purely a matter of sovereignty. And they're living in like kind of a Jewish mythological state based on Jewish mythology. So in a Jewish kingdom, the temple is the seat of power. And so for them, they say, of course, well, we're a Jewish state. How can you have a Jewish state with a mosque with Islamic presence in the seat of power? We have to have a temple there. This is our tradition. This is our history. And so they support this idea of so-called Jewish sovereignty, Zionist sovereignty at the Al-Aqsa compound, even if they don't want to partake in any sacrifice events and slaughter animals and all these kinds of things. And they also see it through the lens of security. Now, Zionism, of course, has made everything that surrounds it into an enemy. So these Palestinians in Gaza, well, of course, they're, you know, an enemy to Israel. And there are armed resistance groups. So for the sake of security, we have to get rid of all of them. You know, they want to expel all of them. There's long been a debate. The debate that has gone on in Israeli society has been the left wing, the kind of old guard, was like, we expelled the Palestinians. Now they're in refugee camps here and there and in Gaza. As long as they stay quiet, they can have some kind of economy. If they don't, you know, resist at all, they can stay over there and we stay over here on our side. And anytime they act up, we just go and pound them with the force of our military. Now, that's the status quo of permanent apartheid. The right wing says, no, they are a permanent threat to us. We need to expel them and take all of that land and settle it and build settlements and make it all part of this, you know, greater Israel project. With the October 7th Hamas attack, the left-wing arguments of permanent apartheid and status quo was totally discredited. So now those like liberal Israelis are completely discredited and lined up behind the right-wing idea of, now how can we have peace with them? We gave, you know, they really believe we gave them Gaza. They were fine over there. What are they doing? You know, and they attacked us and they killed our babies and all these things. So now we don't have a choice. We have to expel them or kill them all, or get rid of them. And so everybody is lined up behind this theocratic fascist core ideology that has kind of a layer now of securitization around it. So all of Israeli society, basically, with the tiniest margins, who oppose it and want a ceasefire, and most of them, or a lot of them, are the ones who have their families held captive, their family members and loved ones held captive in Gaza, and so they have some actual skin in the game, and so they want to see negotiations and a ceasefire. But the vast majority of Israeli society is just pulsing with this genocidal ideology.
That was a really good summation of the unfortunate reality of political Zionism and the way it's permeated every aspect of the Jewish community internationally as well as within Israel. Because speaking to some Zionists as well as some anti-Zionist Jews, I've been speaking to them online for the past couple of weeks. It seems to, at least on every level, have permeated Jewish communities in synagogues, with Sunday schools, going to Jewish school K through 12. Zionism seems to be now working in tandem with just this idea of Judaism. Maybe in isolated communities like the Neturei Karta, or very ultra-Orthodox sort of Jewish communities in New York, in London, maybe they're sort of, still not down with the program, and even some communities in Israel proper. That begs another question. Who is a civilian in Israel? And the sort of line of questioning that is leveled against the Palestinian people, that, they voted in Hamas, they knew what they wanted, and they got what they wanted, so now they're, nobody's innocent in Gaza, and nobody's innocent in the West Bank where Hamas doesn't exist, and yet 155 people have died in the past 30 days, in this sort of mini pogrom or whatever that the IDF is conducting and the settlers are conducting in the West Bank. Are they not able to... I don't understand the cognitive dissonance. Everybody has to serve in the IDF for at least 3 years, if I'm not wrong. Everybody is a settler, potentially, if not a second or third generation European from, whatever, Poland, Austria, Hungary, Germany. They're not very particularly religiously motivated. They seem to be seculars and atheists. And somehow, because of the security situation, they're able to justify mass slaughter. If they don't buy into the religious gobbledygook or whatever, then how are they able to buy into the idea that these are Amalek? And I think Netanyahu was quoting Yusha bin Nun, the successor for Moses, who, we know him also because some biblical stories carry over into the Quran as well as in Islamic religious tradition. So he's quoting it like, after our 40 years in the desert, we're going to, that's what Yusha bin Nun does. He goes in and he conquers the Philistines, and that's insane. This sort of, this is ISIS level, Al-Qaeda level stuff. And the fact that these cosmopolitan, very European, Western media consuming liberal types can buy into this is even with America, at least, empire is sort of far away, This is right at the border. They can hear the bombings in Gaza. They can see them. I've seen them sitting on the hilltops watching, having little picnics and viewing the bombings, I've seen them cheering the bombings on. We've all seen the videos in the past, couple of decades. Especially since the Iraq War, all of these conflicts are more and more televised, and in a sort of voyeuristic, almost sick way, we're all privy to, what the IDF is up to, and yet we're all very silent about it. So my question would be, the more pointed, sort of structured question here would be, if everybody's on board, if the acceptable range of opinions starts way off onto the right, which is wrapped in a layer of securitism, and, even though clearly the Likud party's plan failed, you can't oppress the people beyond a certain point, Hamas will organically spring up. They will turn to violence because any political action and any political process has been shut down by Israel. So violence is their only option. how are they able to reconcile the conservative right with securitarism, and then even though allegedly 1,400 people have been killed on 7th October, and how are they still able to back Netanyahu? I mean, is the Hannibal Directive, the idea that an Israeli soldier or a citizen is less valuable dead than alive, has that permeated Israeli society to the point where they're like, yeah, sure, bomb the hostages as well? Because one would assume that any sort of conflict where there's hostages involved, it would start with a dialogue. It could end in violence, that I can accept, but it would start with dialogue. I mean, even with 9/11, the turnaround time with America was a bit slower than this. This was, within minutes, the Israeli IDF had figured out that they had to level the Gaza Strip and leave no one alive. And I think they've killed off at least 1% of the entire population of Gaza. How are they able to still stand by Netanyahu? His own son is in Miami somewhere. I saw somewhere online that he's chilling on the beach somewhere, and he's not on the front line, even though they've called back 300,000 reservists to come and fight. Little kids, I mean, who are completely out of shape, not ready to fight the people who in the Gaza Strip who've been preparing for 20 years. These physically fit militants who have been training, who have tunnel systems, who are ready to die. I mean, what do they expect is going to happen?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack. I mean, I think it's important to understand, why is it that, American Jews, for example, who are overwhelmingly secular, why they support this. I mean, a lot of it has to do with identity politics. Israel is the ultimate expression of identity politics, where, it is simply a state, a state for Jews, and primarily for European Jews, for white Jews. And there's a racial hierarchy in Israel among its Jewish Israeli population where, basically they couldn't get enough European Jews because a lot of them were wiped out in the Holocaust. So eventually Zionists had to settle for the off-color version, the Arab Jews. And so they did, whatever they could, including using terrorist attacks on Jewish populations throughout the Middle East in order to compel them to go to join the project. And then eventually, of course, they got, they still needed more. So they got Ethiopian Jews. And so they're constantly looking for ways to compel Jews to join the project. But then didn't they
sterilize the Ethiopian Jews? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off.
Yes.
Yes,
they did.
Why did they bring them in the first place?
So it's a brutal irony, but yes, they did. They sterilized, in fact, Ethiopian Jews, and they also they kidnapped Arab Jews, Yemeni Jews. They kidnapped their children. So it's a process of forcing them to assimilate, to abandon kind of any of the culture that they had from Arab countries. And if you talk to the vast majority of Israeli Jewish Arabs, they are the most fervently anti-Arab. It's kind of like the poor whites of the United States, that big underclass that tend to be very vocal and explicit in their racism, because they're the ones that are most similar to, in the United States, they're the same class as the poor blacks. And so they want to make sure to maintain their privilege just above them. And same in Israel, they're the ones who are just slightly above the Palestinians, so they have to, they want to maintain their loyalty to the state and their privilege as just a little bit better than a Palestinian. So, American Jews who like to, live in a kind of multicultural, diverse, cosmopolitan world. And it's purely about identity for them because, the fact is most American Jews don't know anything about Judaism, nor do they know anything about Zionism. I mean, the Judaism that I was raised with, I didn't, this whole analysis that I've presented to you today and that I've been presenting and is kind of the basis for my new documentary, I didn't know any of this. I had to learn all of this and develop it over time. But I was raised as a Reformed Jew. secular, largely secular. And so what happens is when we don't learn the Jewish customs and theology and religion, it gets filled in by Zionism, where they tell you, well, you're a Jew, so being a good Jew means supporting Israel, and that's your homeland, and that's what it is. So that's what Judaism is for a lot of people, is just like some kind of soft support for the state of Israel, and then any opposition to it, whether it's someone saying free Palestine or something like that, or it's like the Hamas attack on October 7th, is seen as anti-Semitism, and so it becomes like a triggering thing where you have like wealthy Jews in Los Angeles or whatever who as Israel is slaughtering Palestinians by the thousand per day, they think that, oh, I'm the victim here. Hamas is going to come out of a tunnel in my Beverly Hills mansion and attack me. And oh my God. So Israel's actually protecting us by mass murdering children. That's what they really believe. It's just so detached from reality. I despise these people, if you can't tell. It's just like, these are the worst people to me. And it's really just an expression of their lack of class consciousness, and of course, they have no sympathy, or they don't actually care about Jewish Israelis who are, say these soldiers who should not be sent in to fight, this war and get killed by some Hamas sniper or some IED. I don't want them to die either. Or the Israeli hostages who are terrified for their lives in tunnels. Like, they oppose a ceasefire as they're sitting there in the most privileged positions in the world, and it's just sickening.
I would love to see Ben Shapiro go and fight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Please, Ben Shapiro, I insist. Go strap up, join the Israeli army. You're such a fervent believer. I want to. This is my message to Ben Shapiro. Please go join the Israeli army, strap up, go get yourself, an M16 and see how long you last in northern Gaza.
He should take Jordan Peterson as well.
Take him, yes. Together you guys could have your own
together
unit.
They should give them hell.
Absolutely. If they really believe, they should do it.
This journalist, Aaron Mate, of course you know him.
Yes.
I'm big fans. He taught me, I was listening to him the other day, and he taught me an English idiom that I've never heard, navel gazing. I thought it was hilarious. That rich Zionist kids in New York, in big universities in America, studying liberal arts and, whatever intersectional feminism, or they're pursuing whatever gender identity and identity politics. And at the same time, they're somehow able to place themselves smack dab in the middle of this conflict in the Middle East. They're somehow placed themselves at the center of this conflict, and somehow Hamas is directly targeting them. Like, they're directly in the crosshairs for Abu Ubaydah, and he's coming to get them, and he's some scary Arab in the middle of the desert, and he's gonna pop out of a tunnel. You described it aptly and beautifully, and very tragically, if I might say so. But yesterday you saw Abu Ubaydah with his statement, and he speaks very eloquently and he speaks with a lot of conviction. He's claimed that they have taken out about 130 odd military vehicles, either partially or completely. Now, if I do the maths right there, even if they've injured or maimed the young boys from the IDF operating those vehicles, if that's 3 per vehicle, that's at least 400 or 500 guys. Can Israel take this kind of casualty rate? I mean, already with the hostages, and then the soldiers, and then the civilians that died in Kibbutz Be'eri on the 7th, in the crossfire, especially I think at the music festival between the IDF and the Hamas fighters. Can the Israeli public consciousness take this sort of constant loss of life? I mean, is the Israeli government clamping down on the numbers? Because they're clearly clamping down on news and information. People are being shadow banned. People are being outright banned online. You don't hear a lot of voices from the Palestinian side, except maybe on Sky News with the Piers Morgan show for some reason. I mean, I found that to be odd and hilarious. I mean, that Piers Morgan, maybe he did it for the views. I don't know. I'm cynical about this. Maybe Piers Morgan thought that this is a big audience and, I can exploit it. But how are they reacting to the imagery? So it's clear that people like Motaz and Prestia, their voices are not getting to the Jewish or the Zionist voices in Europe and America. But what about their own soldiers, Israeli IDF soldiers getting killed or maimed or injured and all this loss of life? I mean, are they not concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the only way to get Israelis to feel anything that maybe this is not a good idea is when their soldiers start dying. And the Israeli official numbers of casualties, I don't know exactly what there are, but I mean, it was like 2 days ago or 3 days ago, it was like 28 soldiers killed. And at the same day, Hamas released this incredibly well-produced and edited video of, these guys, they're fighters taking out like several tanks. And you have to wonder, wait a minute, is really just 28 soldiers that have been killed? And then I read there are accounts coming out in Haaretz, the big liberal flagship Israeli paper, where it describes these there are Israeli commanders who say, we do not believe the body counts of Israeli soldiers coming out. They said, we don't believe the numbers of Hamas militants killed from the Israeli government. So, and it also said that Hamas actually didn't try to stop the Israeli advance into Gaza, because that's not how it fights. What it does is let them come in and then pop out of tunnels and attack and carry out operations, and that's their strength. That's what they can do.
Abu Ubaydah alluded to this in his speech yesterday. He said that we don't have a very tough terrain. We don't have mountains. We don't have any sort of trees or any sort of jungle coverage. What they have is civilian infrastructure and rubble. They're banking on there to be an enormous amount of rubble so that the tanks and military bulldozers can't operate. As an outside viewer, I mean, I have skin in the game. I mean, I feel for the Palestinian cause, but as removed as Ben Shapiro is, how is it that I'm able to see that there is no military strategy or intelligence involved in going into urban combat with the militia that is equipped, motivated, and ready to fight to the end? At least for 90 days, they can hold out in the tunnel systems, as much as I've understood of the combat. And your military vehicles can't get in. They can't maneuver and operate properly, because if you see the footages, they're shooting at these vehicles with the Yasin rockets at point blank range, because there's not a lot of maneuverability amongst the rubble. You saw the footage of this young guy. I mean, he runs up to the thing. He runs up to this Israeli tank and he places an explosive device on one of the trophy systems, and he takes it out. And then his buddy, his partner, takes it out with one of the Yasin rockets at point blank range. By the way, is Israel suppressing these footages? Are they reaching the Israeli citizens? Just general, international support? People in the Zionist camp, are they seeing this footage, or are they being spurred on to be more violent, more aggressive in their invasion?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think these images are definitely, the Israeli government does not want people to see them, to see that the Israeli soldiers, the Israeli military is taking losses, and having casualties. They're trying to, they've come up with all kinds of lies to project that, it's going really well in Gaza. There were videos they did where they had guys planting Israeli flags on buildings in the very, very, very north of Gaza and saying, we're deep in Gaza City, taking over. They had another video they promoted today where there were Israeli soldiers on the beach talking about, we conquered this area and we're going to reestablish settlements. And then they sing the national anthem around this flag on a stick. So this is all about projecting Israeli control and victory. and that it's, really in control of what's going on. But I mean, yeah, those videos that are coming out pretty much every day now from Al-Qassam and Abu Ubaida's statements, and then the little bits of information that undermine the official narrative that we get in the Israeli press, I think it's a completely different thing. And so, can the Israeli army continue to occupy Gaza and not take massive casualties? Or at some point, the truth is going to come out. Parents are going to start wondering, I haven't heard from my kid. What's going on? And that is the thing that can compel Israeli society. So when they start paying a toll, when they start paying a cost, it's basically a lot of those Israelis who had their families taken captive on October 7th. Well, those are the ones who want a ceasefire, and it's for obvious reasons, because now they're getting a little taste of what Palestinians have been dealing with for decades and decades. Just a little taste, of the fear, the insecurity, the horror, the reality of what Zionism is. So, I mean, I don't know, what the reality is of how many casualties there are, but you can bet that the Israeli government and military and Netanyahu have every motivation to cover that up from the Israeli public.
I mean, it's obvious why they would do that, but it's tragic that the only thing that would motivate the Israeli public to demand a ceasefire and to demand everyone to come to the negotiating table would be Israeli soldier casualties. It's a sad reality that the Palestinian people are viewed as subhuman, regardless of their religion. They could be Christian Palestinians, or they could be Arabs. Zionism I've been looking at it for years now, but the way you've broken it down is genuinely tragic. That you have this population in Israel, and it's their minds that are captive. They're free to go around the city. They could be liberals. They could, Tel Aviv is this eclectic cosmopolitan, isn't like the LGBT capital of the world or something. And at this, you could be anybody in Israel, but at the same time, their minds are completely captured and enamored with this very perverted ideology, which is akin to an almost jihadism and an Al-Qaeda, ISIS sort of Wahhabism, a very niche sort of interpretation which is separate from the orthodoxy of Islam. Similarly, like Wahhabism, by the way. There's the British connection, like with Wahhabism, like back in the day, and there's the Christian Zionist connection with Wahhabism. The parallels are almost biblical. The really strange thing, coming back to an earlier thing you'd mentioned, and it just skipped my mind, about this kookism. First of all, that's hilarious that it's called kookism.
Right.
The other thing is, you said something very strange. You said that there is a Jewish belief that the Messiah will come into the city, the holy city, on a donkey. Do you know that in eschatological belief systems in Islam, this is an established belief for the Antichrist? The Muslims believe that the Antichrist will come in on a donkey. I'm not joking. I'm not pulling your leg right now.
Yeah.
There's something about religion, you can have it do whatever you want it to do,
Yeah.
And it's dangerous. It's genuinely dangerous. Like, I see these Christian Zionist types, like you see this man, Dennis Prager, and
Yeah.
this strange relationship, this Judeo-Christian fantasy. Is it just America and Israel? I mean, you see it spreading in Europe, with France doing the crackdowns and Germany doing the crackdowns, and Ursula von der Leyen, who is not an elected representative, right? She's not democratically elected, and she's clamping down on free speech, and she's clamping down on protests, and she's not calling for a ceasefire. What is this weird Judeo-Christian? Do you know of the actual roots of the sort of Christian Zionism? Are you aware of any, big financiers? I know the mega churches are way into it. They don't mind.
Yeah.
They don't mind the Israelis spitting on them when they show up in Israel proper. They don't mind that. They think it's it's all in fair play. When the Messiah comes back, he'll deal with those Jews. But in the here and now,
Right.
Who is financing this insanity? Who is, because and Israel is openly accepting this money. They're happy to
Right.
they're happy to accept these American tax dollars as well as charitable efforts.
Right. Well, definitely a major motivation for U.S. support for Zionism is evangelical Christian Zionism. If you saw, there's a good report from Lee Camp. I'm sorry, Lee Fang, the U.S. reporter who recently went to Congress and asked if that played a role, and he asked different representatives, and they all said yes, this is going to be the end times, and that's why we support Israel, and so it's this very cynical kind of support that yes, we're supporting them so they can all die in some apocalyptic war, because we actually hate them. And actually, Zionism really was originally Christian millenarian. It was an idea of Christian millenarianism in from Britain, where yes, they believed that all of the Jews have to go back, and when they do, then the Antichrist will come, and there will be this great war and apocalyptic war, and then the end times will come, and Jesus Christ will come and rule for a period of something like 1,000 years. And sorry,
you could make a religion out of that.
yeah, exactly. And so this strain of this fanatical strain of Christianity, like Zionism, like Wahhabism, is very useful for the ruling class. And so it's been kind of propagated, promulgated, spread, and promoted in order to give a theological justification for imperialism. And so this is quite common in the United States. I mean, and this is not new. I mean, it's been this way for years and years, where pastors and mega churches, support Israel so much, and you have delegations of, slack-jawed Christian, people from whatever, wherever in the South or whatever rural community who are going to Israel to support the Jews, and and of course they equate Jews with Zionism, which is a function of their anti-Semitism. You also have this being promoted in Latin America. The U.S. has heavily promoted Christian evangelical beliefs in Latin America as a counter to traditional Catholicism, and also even more to liberation theology, which has played a key role in revolutionary thought in Latin America over the past several decades. I mean, in Brazil, it's grown massively, and that was one of the big reasons there was so much support for Jair Bolsonaro. So it's a very, very powerful movement that plays a key role in U.S. support for Israel at the kind of grassroots level, all the way up to the top of the political sphere.
That's insane, but I would like to tell you something even funnier. There's a new kind of there's a new kind of Zionism. It's called Wahabbi Zionism. There's particular strains of Wahhabism in Saudi, in the UAE, where you see the scholarly and religious class outwardly saying that because we have contracts with the state of Israel now, because we've been negotiating with them, you can't. It would be sinful for you to boycott McDonald's. It would be sinful for you to boycott Starbucks. Like, there's been actual ulama, muftis, right? So the equivalent of rabbis or pastors or public speakers, and they're famous in the UAE, in Saudi. You see them all over the place, and they're insisting that as dutiful Muslims, we have to support Starbucks. We have to support McDonald's. The BDS movement they've been saying protest is haram. They've been saying boycott movements are haram. And we can't do any of these things without the consent of the ruler. There's a very inbuilt sort of sycophancy for the ruling class in Wahhabism. People don't know this commonly. The strain of Wahhabism that Osama and the Al-Qaeda types were practicing was another. And then the strain of Wahhabism that is maintained in Saudi Arabia and the UAE is safer for the established monarchies. I've done the Hajj, so I'm fine. I can talk about whatever about the Saudi Arabia. I've done the pilgrimage, so I can be a Saudi Arabia all I want. It's absurd. Huge, like, celebrity muftis, these like celebrity religious types, on Twitter, on Instagram. Sure. Joel Osteen's, if I might, Joel Osteen's and these kinds of guys for the Muslim world. they're openly coming out and saying that just the insane level of the psyop that is being run is seeing Muslims come out and say, oh, you have to purchase Starbucks, you have to buy a cup of coffee there. Zionism and it's sort of, even talking about this, you have to admit that even though you're Jewish maybe and you have less of that sort of guilt, as a South Asian, as somebody who's grown up in English speaking sort of an education system, a very Eurocentric sort of worldview, I still feel a certain amount of guilt or like certain amount of ick when I talk about the Jewish people like this, because there's like the connotations of anti-Semitism. And there's the connotations of this sort of, do I hate them because they're a successful minority, or is it that sort of that sort of perverted idea that maybe Disney movies put in my head for what the archetype of a Jewish person is. So two questions for more of a Pakistani audience is there's a increasing amount of a belief here that BDS does not work and that we shouldn't participate in it because we're so dependent on Western trade. And the second thing is, where do you cross the line with anti-Semitism from anti-Zionism? I mean, where's the distinguishing line? And then I tack on a third anecdote just to make you smile. Your Victoria Newland. You know this woman, American? Yeah. She stopped a major protest in Islamabad recently for Palestine. So, the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is the sort of the Muslim Brotherhood equivalent in South Asia, it was organizing a huge protest in Islamabad, the capital. And the leadership claimed that they were arrested and stopped because Victoria Newland, they said the name, it was hilarious, had called the capital and said, we're not gonna stand by any sort of anti-Israeli sentiment being publicly, sort of. But Alhamdulillah, eventually the leadership, went to Qatar. They met with the Hamas leadership. They also went to the Rafah crossing. They've already reached there with aid. So I mean, the Israeli lobby or the American lobby is not that strong in Pakistan, but it does exist. It has a certain amount of influence. Given these three, sort of the anecdote and the two questions, how would you describe peaceful protest like the BDS, and where do you stand? Because you're a white person, right? And we need white saviors. We need you to tell us what to do and how to direct our protest and what we should do with our money.
Well, I'm always glad to offer my advice as the white person to impart my faith upon the brown hordes of masses. No, but I mean, okay, first to address the anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism question, the key thing to understand, I think, is that Zionism is anti-Semitism. Like, Zionists based their views of what Jews are off of anti-Semitic beliefs. They're heavily influenced, even going back before Zionism, by Christian beliefs about Jews, by anti-Semitic Christian stereotypes and beliefs about Jews. And so Zionists embraced that. And that's why they believed we are a separate nation. They just decided that we are, instead of inferior, we are superior. So they, for example, another thing I keep in mind is that like Zionists hated Jews. They blame them for anti-Semitism, like I was saying before, which is, who blames Jews for anti-Semitism? Anti-Semites do. They believe it's their own fault. This is victim blaming. So that's not something, Jews believe, of course, that it's our own fault. It's that, but that is fundamentally what Zionists believe. When the Zionist ideology was all about creating a new Jew instead of that weak Jew who believed in, intellectual pursuits and study and this kind of thing. We want a strong Jew. It was like a fascist version of Judaism, and they abandoned all of the traditions and the culture because they thought that was all about everything that was in the past. No more Yiddish, the Eastern European Jewish language that my family spoke, that my bubby, my grandmother spoke. May she rest in peace. That was forbidden. That was like there were meetings of Jews speaking Yiddish in in Zionist Palestine before the establishment of the state, and they would be attacked by Zionists and broken up simply for speaking Yiddish. Now, what other kind of militias or forces would attack Jews for speaking their language? Nazis would do that, So and if you actually look, so Zionists are firmly anti-Semites. They hate Jews. They collaborated with the Nazis. I mean, there's no secret. The transfer agreement that Ben-Gurion's Labor Party negotiated with Nazi Germany when it broke the global Jewish boycott of Nazi Germany. There's a lot to say about Zionist Nazi collaboration. So even to the point where in 1942, as late as 1941, 1942, Zionists from the Lehi, the Stern Gang, which was the third and most kind of right-wing fascistic of the Zionist militias that eventually formed the Israeli military, they sent out two letters to Nazi Germany saying, we will join you and fight the British, and offer a 10,000 man strong army to fight against the British in recognition of a so-called Jewish state in Palestine. And they wanted to have a totalitarian state modeled on Nazi Germany or fascist Italy. So even after the final solution was already being implemented, and it was no secret to anyone, Zionists were still seeking to collaborate with Nazis. For me, that's like that's what helps, divorce Zionism and Judaism and this whole, if I'm criticizing Zionism, actually being anti-Semitic. And the idea that, even today, that criticizing Israel slaughtering thousands and thousands of innocent people is anti-Semitic is disgusting. It's sick. And to weaponize anti-Semitism and the suffering of Jews, which Zionists participated in and collaborated with, is the height of cynicism. So, anybody who's claiming I do see spikes in anti-Semitism online now because people who don't differentiate between Judaism and Zionism will make all kinds of comments. See, this is what Hitler was right. See, he was right. We had to do this. Now these people are obliging Zionists because Zionists want you to believe that this is what, that we are the Jews and we're killing all these people because we have to. And so if you don't like it, you're an anti-Semite. And there's even a somewhat prominent figure who he's really a wolf in sheep's clothes, who has dressed himself as some kind of anti-Zionist pro-Palestine figure named Lucas Gage. I don't know if you've seen him on Twitter, but this guy is an out-and-out Nazi. He's a straight-up Nazi.
I've seen Jackson Hinkle. I've seen the guys.
I wouldn't put Jackson in that category at all.
Jackson's more of a provocateur, but Lucas Gage has some wacky ideas about the Jewish people.
Lucas is a straight up Nazi. I mean, it's more than wacky ideas. He's a like straight up Nazi. I've called him out before. I called him out on the Jimmy Dore show when he was brought up. I mean, this guy, I think he's actually, his whole goal is to discredit anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. We had a rally back in February here in Washington, D.C., the Rage Against the War Machine rally. And it was being attacked by ultra leftists as, you're in bed with fascists, blah, 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 because we had libertarians who organized it and spoke, anti-war libertarians. And Lucas Gage shows up, and I don't know who he is. I've never met this guy. I've never heard of him. And he's like, Dan, I know you from Redacted, which is the show that I used
Yeah,
to
yeah,
work
yeah.
with and I still appear on. And he comes up, he's like, oh man, Dan, it's great to see you. I'm an anti-war veteran. Let's take a picture. And we take a picture, and I'm like, yeah, I take a picture with anyone. I don't, I don't care. Um, and then, I start like months later, I start to like notice his anti-Semitic posts, and it's all about like Jews this, Jews that. And now he's posing as like pro-Palestine. And since I called him out, he blocked me on Twitter, and he obsesses over me and writes long posts and
Mm.
angry videos denouncing me that you don't get to call me a Nazi. I decide what I am. He's suddenly like really sensitive about his gender, or like his identity. Like he's like one of these like gender identity freaks.
So you mentioned Lucas Gage. You mentioned this sort of neo-Nazi, sort of white nationalist kind of element as well that exists in the online space. So in this large spectrum of opinions, Hasbara, I think, has its work done for itself already beforehand. They don't have to really, it's not about just banning and censorship. It's also about muddying the waters. Because when you have people claiming that, oh, the Jews have always been like this. I mean, look at Europe, 19 whatever, then 18, the pogrom in Poland. This is what actually happened, and this, that, and the other. How do you cut through that bullshit? Like, you were embedded in Israel, you worked on ground in Palestine, you've met the people, you speak some of the language, you were there for 3 years. We've all seen the documentary, Killing Gaza. And now you have another one that you say is going to blow the lid off of political Zionism and the whole infestation that is happening in Israel. It's sort of this mind virus that people have over there. So what can you say about being on ground, and what do those documentaries mean, and what are you hoping that they'll achieve in this sort of ecosphere, this Twitter sphere, or this online space? What do you think you want to achieve with that?
Well, when I got to Palestine in 2014, within kind of, I don't know, several months, I had identified, or maybe the first year, I had identified two major stories that I felt like were essential, but were not being told. And, a lot of the journalism tended to be kind of repetitive and wasn't really advancing people's understanding of the conflict. It was the same old thing, like, Israeli, clashes and all the like tired tropes. Palestinians say Israeli army, claims that, Israeli army claims were taken at face value as true. And Palestinians say it was always qualified like that. So all this like tired stuff, I just was trying to find some like an analysis that was deeper, that cut through all of this nonsense and propaganda. So the first story, of course, the big story was the suffering of Gaza. I mean, when I was in Gaza, I felt like I was going into the Warsaw Ghetto, in the lead up to the Holocaust. And I had access, and I was able to go in and out, and it was just this kind of like rare privilege. And so that was kind of the mindset that I had going in there, and that became, of course, Killing Gaza. And it's having this resurgence today for obvious reasons that I never could have imagined, and it gives people a sort of framework to understand, at least to some degree. I mean, we don't get really into the history and how all of those refugees were ethnically cleansed from their villages and ended up in the Gaza Strip, but you see the suffering, the siege, the brutality that they face, and their resistance also. So the other story that I identified was Zionism reaching its logical endpoint. This focus on the destruction, the takeover and destruction of the Al-Aqsa compound, which was the strain of Zionism that really sought to achieve that, was very marginal a few decades ago. Though, of course, you don't need more than a few people to carry out, you need one person to carry out a very radical terrorist attack, and it changes the entire situation. But now it's totally mainstream in Israel. And so that's a story that I hadn't seen anyone really tell, and especially to develop it into an analysis of, the analysis that I tried to, present as best as I could earlier, of how did we get from Theodore Herzl's political Zionism, and lobbying the European powers to today's fanatical cabinet surrounding Netanyahu, people who want to drop a bomb on the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Like, how did we get to that point? And so that's what my documentary does, is it shows like who these people are, what their ideology is, and like how we got here and what the danger is. And so that's the documentary I'm working on all the time. In addition to my journalism and trying to do interviews to stay on top of everything going on, I'm advancing on this documentary that I'd planned to finish, sometime next year. But for obvious reasons, I'm trying to expedite that process as fast as humanly possible. And so we're relying on public support in order to do this. So, anyone who wants to defend Al-Aqsa and see, contribute towards an ideological vehicle to defuse the situation, or at least document history, can contribute to this project. I mean, I really am trying to make this a people's documentary that everyone who wants to contribute to it can. And I'm not relying on like some wealthy Emirati oil tycoon to fund this thing. I'm relying on the public because I that's what I believe in is the people, the masses. So yeah, anyone who wants to contribute, whether it's $1 or $1,000 or whatever you like, please you can do it on buymeacoffee.com/uncaptured, or if it's a more substantial amount, you want to contact me directly, you can do that. You can email me, you can message me on Twitter, and I tend to be pretty good about checking those messages, though sometimes I get a little bit lost because there's so many. But yeah, so that's the project.
We were honored to have you. Hopefully we're going to have you again some other time if you have time. So just to clarify for the audience, the first documentary, Killing Gaza, is out. It's available. We're going to be screening it here in Lahore, in Pakistan, for a Pakistani audience, inshallah. We'll be sharing that on your socials as well. The one that's to come out, hopefully people can see Killing Gaza and then they can be inspired to sort of finance and support the upcoming project, because it is fundamental to diffuse Zionism in its current form, both for the Israeli people and the people abroad who support Zionism, as well as for people who are opposed to Zionism and they're not, well equipped enough to discuss or debate or to carry forward the discourse on the subject. Dan, the work you're doing is more than any Muslim or brown person could ask. You are our white hero, white knight and savior. We love you here. And we hope we've been able to communicate that warmth, even though, unfortunately, we're not physically present. Thank you so much. I mean, we pestered you into coming on. You came on. You delivered. Sorry, I speak in a very meandering fashion. But thank you for your patience. Thank you for your time. Good luck with your endeavors, and long live Gaza, long live Palestine. Thank you for your contribution to the freedom struggle in Palestine. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. It's been great, and look forward to doing it again. And it's an honor to be able to speak with you and your audience in Pakistan. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dan. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.